All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. My name is Maureen Conway. I'm Vice President for Policy Programs and Executive Director of the Economic Opportunities Program here at the Aspen Institute. And I am thrilled to welcome you all to today's conversation on building good jobs into America's infrastructure investments. At the Economic Opportunities Program, we advance promising policies, strategies, ideas to help low and moderate income Americans connect to opportunity and to thrive in today's changing economy. And we're particularly excited about today's conversation on infrastructure jobs because actually within the Economic Opportunities Program, this is an area that we have spent a lot of time not only talking about, but researching and looking at how communities across the country organize programs that can help their local residents build the skills and abilities that they need to connect to building trades jobs, including those involved in rebuilding America's infrastructure. Investment in infrastructure are important to America's future economic growth, but many communities have used these investments to also really think about expanding economic opportunity. And we put a number of the resources that we've published over the years on construction jobs out on the resource table if you happen to see them, or if you missed them, you can take a look on your way out. But I also wanted to mention that, about 8 years ago, we did a survey of organizations across the country. We had over 350 organizations respond, telling us about how they connected people to training services and other services to connect them to jobs in the building trades. And we're going to be redoing that survey so that communities across the country will know who's in their community that can help them find the talent pipeline that they need. So we're going to be launching that survey this Friday at noon. If you know somebody who should be responding to our survey who's engaged in this work of connecting people to jobs in the building trades, please pass along that information to them because we're excited that we're going to be doing that survey again. Okay. I'm done with my survey plug. And now I'm really, really thrilled to be introducing an absolutely fabulous panel that we have to talk with you about infrastructure jobs. I need to do actually 2 more things before I get to that one. Please do silence your phones, but please do tweet. Our hashtag for today's conversation is TalkGoodJobs. And I also do need to thank the supporters of our Working in America series. They're tremendous partners to us. We couldn't do it without them. They contribute not only the resources, but they've been great thought partners to us. So we really are grateful to our supporters at the Prudential Foundation, the Walmart Foundation, the Ford Foundation, and the Cerna Foundation. Okay, so as I mentioned, folks' bios are in your materials, so I'm just going to briefly put names to faces, but they're a terrific group, so please do take a look at your materials. So I will start to my very far left. To the right for you is Denise Fairchild, who is President and CEO of Emerald Cities Collaborative. Next to Denise is Addie Tomer, a fellow Metropolitan Policy Program at the Brookings Institution. Next to Addie is Mayor Dana Redd, Mayor of Camden, New Jersey. And next we have Rick Moore, Vice President, Director of Community Relations at Swinnerton Incorporated. And very delighted to welcome Lori Aratani, reporter at the Washington Post, to moderate today's conversation. And Lori, I hand it over to you. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'm pleased to welcome you to the Aspen Institute. We're glad you can be part of today's conversation about how investments in infrastructure can be used not only to rebuild crumbling roads, bridges, power grids, and ports, but to create quality jobs for workers of diverse backgrounds. We have a distinguished panel of experts representing the government, the private sector, the policy, and nonprofit world here to share their experience and expertise. In recent days, infrastructure has been making headlines, and as someone who has written about crumbling roads, bridges, and subway systems for years, I've never seen so much excitement around these kinds of investments. But sometimes overlooked in those photos of the giant sinkholes on 14th Street and the crumbling bridges are the opportunity that infrastructure investments present in creating quality jobs for a diverse workforce. These folks have some great insights to share, And I know I'm going to learn a great deal. I know you all too. So take advantage of their expertise and don't be shy. Please ask questions. That's it. We'll get started. So I think we'll start off the conversation talking a little bit about sort of the overview of what we're looking at. I know that lots of folks have heard the $1 trillion number, which sounds so large, but which I have read is only a drop in the bucket, exactly, when it comes to infrastructure investment. But Adi, I know that infrastructure can be a lot of different things to different people. And at Brookings, you all have done some really significant research and analysis of the topic over the last several years. So I hope you'll tell us what you and your colleagues, how you all define infrastructure, what occupations and industries you sort of include in that, and give us a sense of how large that workforce is, and who those folks are, where they come from, what their background is.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Lori, and thanks to Maureen and her team here at Aspen for putting this event together. Frankly, it's a really important conversation. Humor me for a second and kind of think about in your head, what do you think an infrastructure job is, right? I think for most of you, it probably involves a hard hat, something I've never had on before. But it's probably the idea of building something, right? I think that's what we tend to think about infrastructure as. And really, that kind of archetype has been pretty firmly ensconced in our policy discourse for really decades now. I think most of it can go back to the Eisenhower era and building out the interstates. But really, I think what really put it in modern terms is George H.W. Bush, right? Bush 1, if you will. Talking about jobs for the infrastructure bill that he signed during his tenure. And what that tends to kind of put us on a path to, though, is really an understatement of just how important infrastructure is to our economy. So our team at Brookings, one of our former colleagues is actually in the audience right now, so really a broad team of about 4 or 5 people put together a new approach to looking at infrastructure. And what we wanted to do was say, let's get past those hard hat style jobs, right, and really understand what it means in our economy. And what we found is that there's, looking across 42 industries, think about that for a second, 42 industries are in infrastructure, and this is why it's so important. I have my notes open, so I hit these exact numbers that we spent all this time doing. 95 occupations, 95 different jobs in our economy are related to infrastructure. And what's most notable here, let's go even bigger than those, 14.5 million workers work in the infrastructure industry by our definition. That's about 1 out of every 10 workers. All that talk you hear about manufacturing jobs, healthcare jobs, this is bigger, right? So what does infrastructure actually mean? It's not just building stuff. It's how we make sure that water can get to our homes every day, right? So we can take a shower, brush our teeth, right? That kind of cook food at night. It's how we can make sure that the goods that all of you consume, I assume probably about a third to a quarter of you are Amazon Prime members in the room. How do you think the stuff gets to your house, right? It's not just the material movers who are working for UPS and in Amazon warehouses. It's all across the economy to actually move those materials. So it's a really big part of what we do. Now, the other side there that really matters is that not only are 77% of those jobs in those kind of service occupations, the actual maintenance and operations of our staff, it's also a ton of high-end design jobs too, right? So it's not just construction, it's all across the spectrum. Now, one final point to your question, Lori, and then I promise I'll stop, is that there's also the component here of the pay. And to the question of who is doing these jobs. And infrastructure jobs pay a premium at lower ends of the income spectrum, and in particular have very low skill level barriers to entry. So in other words, you don't need a bachelor's to get into many of these jobs. And many of the jobs, as I think we'll hear more about today, actually offer on-site job training, right? So you can actually come to work without necessarily a lot of background in these various infrastructure jobs and get the training you need to get on a sustainable path to a kind of a healthy income for you and your families.
Great, thank you. That's great. Well, now we'll hear from one of the folks that employs a lot of people that work in those jobs. So, Rick, I know that Swinnerton has a long and rich history. It's based in one of my favorite cities, San Francisco. So I'm hoping you can tell us a little bit about the company and about the workforce and the different types of jobs folks that work for you do.
Okay, thank you, Laurie. And thank you to the Aspen Institute for the invite. Swinnerton Builders were general contractors. Again, we're general contractors. We're not engineers or architects. We build buildings, we dig the hole, and bring it up. We've been in business since 1888. We're 129 years old. We're privately held. We have approximately 2,500 people within the Swinnerton organization. And because we are general contractors, we deal with the trades, the laborers, the carpenters, the engineers, the electricians, the plumbers, all the trades that would build a building. With that said, on the other side of that, we also have a good infrastructure in terms of our professional core group. Because even though we do build buildings, we also have to have IT people. We have to have architects on board. We have to have business development, HR, an incredible accounting system. Because last year we did approximately like $3 billion worth of work across the United States. Now, as I said, we started in 1888 out in Bakersfield, California. We were very instrumental in rebuilding San Francisco after the 1906 earthquake, the Fairmont Hotel, the courthouses we did, even going into the type of work with infrastructure. We're looking at, we worked on the Hoover Dam, we worked on the Panama Canal, the locks, moving forward with that. And again, that's all employing craft personnel. But we also have to have the construction craft workforce in place, as well as our professional, people. Like I said, we're a privately held company. Our markets, again, we're general contractors. We deal with the federal, and we are private general contractor as well. A lot of our clients are repeat business, large developments throughout the United States. We're in San Francisco, Los Angeles, Orange County, all over Hawaii, Atlanta, Tennessee. We have a broad footprint, but we're not international. And again, like I said, I want to thank the Aspen Institute for inviting me to address you.
I feel like given the age of our infrastructure, I have to make some kind of joke about some of that work that you did post San Francisco earthquake still being there, still standing, right? Maybe we'll get back to so that's a sign of the good quality work that y'all do.
Thank you.
Well, great. Well, now we'll move on to Mayor Red. So Camden, New Jersey has had some tough years in recent decades. But as mayor since 2010, you have led the city in making significant progress. So you've moved Camden from state control to local control. You've improved the city's credit rating, and you've overhauled the police department. South Jersey Magazine has described you as a commanding woman who's not afraid to make tough decisions, and possibly the one person who can really change Camden. And it already looks like you have. You've also led some significant building redevelopment programs in Camden, commercial buildings, educational facilities, medical, and other projects. So your approach to economic development has been inclusive. Lots of folks I know talk about gentrification and closed opportunities, but you've really tried to open it up to many folks. So I'd love to hear a little bit about, I know we all would love to hear a little bit about how you've done this, and the role that programs such as pre-apprenticeship training programs play in helping open opportunity to residents so that they can be part of this economic boom and this economic growth.
Thank you, Lori, and thank you also to the Aspen Institute for including me in this wonderful panel. It's great to be here to talk about the work that we're doing in the city of Camden. And before I can even get into the pre-apprenticeship training programs, which we are really proud to have launched in 2016, I think a quick look back at where Camden has been will give you a greater appreciation for where we are in the present day. So when I started as mayor in 2010, we had to make a lot of difficult decisions on the front end. We were faced with a fiscal crisis, a $26.5 million deficit for a city a size of 77,000 in population. So we were heavily reliant on state funding in order to balance our budget. So immediately I knew I had to come in and tackle our fiscal bottom line and deal with some of the structural deficit issues that have been in the city for a long time. And so that led us to the restructuring of our police department. And thank God I'm still here after going through that process. But in going through that process and being innovative has allowed us to not only reduce crime in the city of Camden, it's allowed us to advance public safety. And I say public safety is necessary because it is an underpinning for the work that you see transforming Camden in the present day. The second major issue we tackled was public education. So in 2012, along with Camden holding the notorious titles of being the most dangerous city in America, in 2012 we were named as the most impoverished city in America. We had 23 out of 26 failing public schools. And so, again, another tough decision was necessary to improve the lives of children, youth, and families by calling for a full state intervention in our school district with our governor and in partnership with the community. So that became the second leg in the stool. But because we made those tough and difficult decisions, public safety, public education, creating choice for families, led us to what we are now experiencing as economic development, over $2.5 billion being invested in the city of Camden with companies that are committed to Camden, calling Camden home. And some of those companies include Holtec International, the Philadelphia 76ers built their practice facility and administrative offices on the Camden waterfront. Contemporary Graphics, which has embraced our local hiring program where over 46% of their employees are local Camden residents working at their facility, among a number of other businesses that are coming to the city. So when you talk about infrastructure, you talk about not only the roadway projects, the bridge projects that we're all hoping will be funded in this administration, but it's also the eds and meds that have created a new identity for Camden, New Jersey, where our eds and meds have really become the largest employers of Camden residents in our city. And now we have the next wave coming in under the Economic Opportunity Act of 2013. We're seeing the next wave of investment that has led to job creation and job retention. So quickly, because I know my time is winding down, the pre-apprenticeship program was launched last year, designed to train residents in a 10-week program, a pre-apprenticeship program in collaboration with our building trades, with local nonprofits, because I believe as a government official the importance of engaging nonprofits in solutions-based work in cities like Camden. That helps us to really meet the challenges and the needs of children, youth, and families. And so our Camden Construction Career Initiative, we call it 3CI, because government is great for acronyms. But again, we're seeing not only the interest, but we're beginning to see signs of success where residents are trained and placed on many of the construction projects. The last thing I'll say is it's not just about a job, training just for a job, but training for a career. So having that long view, because once we get residents with the required skill sets, so whether it's a welder, whether it is an electrician, plumber, bricklayer, they can take that skill set and go anywhere in New Jersey or throughout the region. But again, this is our starting point where we are now after we've laid the building blocks for Camden's transformation.
That's a great point, because I know a lot of folks, my mom has a saying that she always says, no one fixes anything till the horse leaves the barn, right? You don't fix the fence. But it's important to think about these investments we're making in training for the long term, right? Not just for this job. We're going to get you a job, for the next 6 months. We want to get you a job for the rest of your life, as long as you want to do that. And also in our infrastructure investments, we don't want to just patch that hole. We want to keep going back and patching it. We want to make sure that these are investments that last. So I know Denise has some exciting things. She is with the Emerald Cities Collaborative, which works with communities across the country with two very important goals: advancing sustainable infrastructure, while at the same time promoting the creation of sustainable and inclusive employment and economies. So we'd like to hear a little bit about how you take two things that I think lots of folks are interested in figuring out how to do, how you put them together and make them work.
Great, thank you. I too want to thank Aspen for being a part of this discussion. It's an important time to, thank you very much, to have a question about how we rebuild America. and how do we take it from making sure it's not a low-road economy, but a high-road economy. And that's the work of Emerald Cities. And we do this in coalition. We see ourselves as market intermediaries. And so we bring together coalitions of labor, business, community. Some people call it public-private, but we want to make sure it's public, private, and community organizations that are in regional marketplaces. So we want to change regional economies. So we're in New York, and we're in Seattle, and we're in Cleveland, and we're in Los Angeles. And it's building these coalitions to figure out how we build a sustainable development economy. We have 3 goals, actually. It's how do we green our cities? So that includes our energy infrastructure, our water infrastructure, our sewer infrastructure, our transportation infrastructure. So how do we make our cities greener? And with that investment, we rebuild our communities. And so it's not only just creating jobs, but making sure that the jobs are quality jobs and that they're accessible to the citizens of that region. And then the third is equity. How do we make sure low-income communities of color that have historically been left out of the mainstream economy get to play in this new economy that we're creating? So it's the triple bottom line: environment, economy, and equity. But it's that coalition infrastructure, that civic infrastructure that really makes the difference, because we're driving both the demand and the supply side and bringing the pieces, the elements of this economy together in a way that they currently aren't brought together. They're very fragmented. So you have the business community on one side, and they're creating the jobs, and you've got the training institutions over here, and they're spinning in their own orbit and not connecting to the demand side. And then all of the training institutions are doing different things. There's apprenticeship programs, and there's the community colleges, and there's the community-based training organizations, and they're not talking to each other, and it's very confusing for someone who's trying to get on this pathway to figure out what is the right pathway and how do I get the shortcut to the job. So our job at Emerald Cities is to bring all this together so it's easy to build the sector. There's some predictability, some reliability, some consistency about how these economies grow. So we work with counties, for example. The Cuyahoga County, for example, we have 5 wind turbine projects being built. They call it the LECO project. First wind turbine projects in Lake Erie. We are helping to build the economic inclusion component of it. And like Adi spoke to, it's not just building the turbines, but it's also every supply that goes into that project in the next 3 years. It's going to be the transportation, the food, all of the resources that need to make that project work. We brought together over 300 vendors from the community that are really interested and ready to engage in that project. We work with LA County. They have what they call the Southern California Regional Energy Efficiency Network, 120 jurisdictions within the Southern California region that is trying to figure out how to make their buildings smarter, more energy efficient, and how to save money with use of energy efficiency and solar investments. And we provide the economic inclusion services for those places. Everything from defining the policy of economic inclusion to figuring out how we bring minority, women, veteran, and small contractors to the table, how we, again, organize the workforce infrastructure, and more importantly, how we monitor and report on how well we're doing with economic inclusion. And the last I'll say is we work with counties, we worked on water and sewer projects in Portland. We have a huge affordable and public housing initiative where we're rebuilding our affordable housing projects and making sure that the residents in those buildings are a part of the rebuilding process. And it's not just the construction work. One of the things that we're finding is that you can build a smart building and then it has no operational efficiencies. So the programs and operating engineers, architects, engineers, construction workers, but also operating the facilities, people are key to sort of building a greener city. So that's the work that we do, and it's pretty exciting, even though there are challenges.
Those challenges. Well, that's good. I mean, you point out an important thing, which is I think lots of people who work in this industry, whether they're in education or they're in private companies, they all have good aims, right? And a lot of times we work in silos of isolation, so it's great to have groups like yours, Denise, that can bring folks through and that can help people communicate. It seems so simple, right? But a lot of times we're just in our own little world, so that's so great. So I think we're going to move on, and don't forget all those great questions that I know you all have. You want to talk about the miracle in Camden. I know you definitely want to know more about that. But we're going to take a deeper dive into these infrastructure jobs. Now, Adi talked a little bit about how, we think of infrastructure, we think of those hard hats, but they're changing just as technology is advancing. What you think of those old jobs, may be different. So I know Rick described what frontline workers at Swinnerton do. Adi, I'm hoping you can talk about what you and your colleagues have found in looking at sort of the infrastructure workforce, the types of skills and tools that workers need today, how they might differ from before. And tell us about what today's infrastructure jobs look like.
Yeah, it's a great question. And because of the nature of at least our definition, and I think you heard it from everyone on the panel, right, that it is a lot more than just that kind of hard hat construction work. And even in construction, it actually causes all kinds of different folks to work there. And what we're finding is that inside the infrastructure work, it's modernizing just like every other part of the economy, right? So one of the unique ways that we can track, and this is via give credit to our federal statistical agencies who make everyone's lives easier. That's a plug for federal stats, I think, in this climate. They allow us to actually codify what we all do in our day job. So I want to really quickly talk about a pretty wonky subject, but the topic of tools. So think about when you're sitting at your workstation at your proverbial, at your desk or at your house, wherever you're doing, that's like a tool, right? You use a computer, right? So overall, infrastructure jobs on average are going to use 14 different tools in their work. The average American only uses 6. So think about that for a second. I mean, first of all, these are really creative, smart, multifaceted requirements of the workers. Or the workers have to be smart to have all those multifaceted requirements. So that is a unique component of this work right away. The other thing is that they also tend to have really high levels of knowledge requirements in 11 different content areas. I want to read these because it's maybe things you don't necessarily think about. Physics, geography, engineering, and technology alone, right? I don't know about you, I don't use physics in my job at all, but it doesn't take a rocket scientist to think about how in so much of infrastructure work, it requires some pretty good knowledge of how physics work, right? What not listed here, also geology, right? So these are different kind of topics. You may have not thought about them since you were in high school as like a topic area, right? But these are things people use actively on their jobs every day. And what I kind of want to emphasize one more time, I know I talked about it a little bit in the intro, is that 80+% of these workers, right, are going to get short and long-term training on the job, right? So this is something where not only does it require a breadth of skills, it's a huge amount of different tools that they're going to need to kind of get a handle on, is that actually they can learn it on the job too, right? So this is a great set of collaboration between private sector employers and public sector employers. There's a huge amount of infrastructure work done in the public sector. And really our labor markets trying to work as effectively as they can to get people in those spots. When you add it in again to the fact that there are very low barriers to entry to these jobs and that they pay well at lower ends of the income spectrum, there is so much to like here for how we're providing economic opportunity for the American workforce.
Great. Well, Rick, I'm hoping you can talk to us a little bit about what your workforce policies are and the benefits that your workers can enjoy and take advantage of.
Okay, thank you. But before I hit on that, I'm hearing issues around, infrastructure and the skilled workforce. And one of the challenges that I see with the skilled workforce, especially getting youth into the skilled trades, is that in construction, you're working as long as there's a contract. And once that contract is over with, you're off to the next project. And hopefully, the youth that are going through these training programs through the community-based organizations are building that relationship with that employer, that subcontractor, so they can go to the next job. Because if they don't go to the next job, they're back at the hall. Or they're back at home getting frustrated because, again, they're not collecting that paycheck that in the skilled trades, it's quite, you can make a lot of money, and to keep that going. So again, to get that relationship so you can go to the next job with your employer. Now, Swinnerton, we're finding that in a lot of our interviews and our opportunities, we have to be able to define how we give back to the community. What is our footprint? What community-based organizations are you supporting? What is your retention rate like? What is your past performance of getting people economic development, through the programs that the cities, the counties, the ports have in place? And with that, we have to make sure that those policies are translated throughout everywhere, because you can have all these policies, but if you don't have people monitoring them, if you don't have the staff that knows the obstacles of making sure that these programs do succeed, what happens? Nothing. And then the contractors, will come in with their core workforce and go on to the next job. Meanwhile, the people that you got out of the community-based organizations, they're back in their community.
Right.
So again, it's to make sure that our policies are well-rounded, that we're addressing our clients' clients, because and a lot of our work is private development, but within that private development, our owners have development agreements with the cities. And within that development agreement is that workforce component to make sure that you hire, let's say, 50% of your workforce, from the city and county that you're working in. Another policy that we have is to make sure that we help educate our youth. We're finding that in the school system, they don't push construction. And that's the reason why the vocational programs have gone away. I'm glad to see that there are a lot of STEM programs that are in place, because children are going to have math, English, and problem-solving skills in order to get into the workforce. And when you're dealing with that type of program and dealing with community-based organizations where they have the hard skills and the soft skills of how to maneuver in that construction trade, because it is hard work. Now, on the other side of policies, dealing with community colleges, in San Francisco, there's a program called City Build, which is a really good model of making sure that the city and county of San Francisco have the employees in their program. So when a contractor needs workers, they call City Build and someone get referred to them, and then they can get onto the job site. But they also have a professional service side where people have changed careers. And we have a lot of people through the professional training program who are degreed, who are going through an internship programs with large general contractors, who, when they come out, they become project engineers because they're going through the construction management course as well. And again, making sure that, our students or the youth are ready to go into the workforce, and that we adhere to the policies that the city and counties, put out. In terms of benefits of working with Swinnerton, like I said, we've been in business 129 years. Our contractor license is number 92 in the state of California, so we're one of the oldest. So we do have good policies and procedures in place that are competitive with everybody else. The opportunities of being able to, let's say, get in the elevator, push a button, and you can rise throughout the company. And that is one of the things that keep us as an attractive employer, because there are opportunities that can come out of that.
Well, that's a great summary of just all the different ways in which you try and get, Audie talked about all the different kinds of jobs in there, and it's a great summary of all the different ways that you allow people to find a path within your company.
Absolutely.
That's
And then also, again, working within the high school system of dealing with the pathway programs, and dealing in neighborhoods where people are less fortunate, and letting the youth know that there are opportunities out there for you. We're going to show you, and we're going to show you that people that look like you are out there building those projects. We were just talking in the back room about a project we just finished in Watts, Jordan High School. And we put together a construction club for 2 years with these kids that we showed them how to build a project, and we had classroom activities. And they'd taken them from Watts, then we took them out to Beverly Hills to another high-rise, and to see their eyes light up. Because a lot of these youth don't ever get outside their community to see what is out there. And if we don't open up the door and give them the insight and the opportunity, how are they going to know? And once they see, that gives them encouragement. So as they're going from middle school to high school, they can remember, hey, the skilled trades or the professional side, the engineer, the project manager, entrepreneurships that are out there, where you become your own owner. I mean, so it's a wide field, but we have to make sure that we give them the opportunity that is there.
And I guess folks have to remember that if you work in your community, you're probably more likely to invest and value that community, which I'm sure you've found. You know, once again, it's that theme of connections and communications, right? Communication, right? Making sure that you've got those workers, that you connect them and communicate, you know, people communicate their needs. Denise, you know, there's this perception out there that, you know, there's all these great jobs, all these great benefits, and, you know, it doesn't take a lot, you just sign up, you put in your application, you'll be there. But I'm sure that you've learned in your experience, it's not necessarily that easy for folks to just walk in, and especially these days with a lot of advances. So I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about some of the challenges that workers face when they try and, you know, they decide they want to pursue careers in this growing industry. But what are the challenges that they face?
Well, even before we talk about the challenges within the industry, let's just talk about the challenges even thinking about the industry. I think there's a whole issue about, you know, we as parents don't want our kids to go into construction, you know, or infrastructure. You know, they see that as jobs of the past, as opposed to understanding the technology and as you were talking about, how many 14 different tools that have been used, and understanding construction is, in fact, particularly apprenticeship programs, it is a degree, it's a college degree, because everybody wants their kids to get a bachelor's, a master's degree, and go on and become a technology or rocket scientist or something of that nature. So we have a real marketing issue in terms of why the construction sector, the infrastructure sector, is in fact a good place to get more money than a PhD could get, right? So that's number one. But once you actually get it, once the light bulb goes on and you feel that this is good, most of it is, particularly in the energy sector, it is 60% construction related. It is hard related. And it is hard work. And it is seasonal. And you have to have a driver's license, because once you finish one job, you have to get to the next. And then the industry is not an equal employment opportunity employer, I think. You know, women have a really hard time in this sector because you have to get up early in the morning and you got to figure out where you're going to get your child care, and who's going to take care of your kids during, you know, the hours that you have to be at work. I don't know that it hires African Americans at a very significant number as well. So there is the question of access, and then there's a question of how you actually get into the unions themselves. All right, and so the unions have become a lot more open. They've become a lot more diverse, but it's not universal. There's still a lot of, you know, historical experiences about exclusion and the lack of diversity, and even when you get into the apprenticeship programs. I remember talking to a black female underwater welder. Tell me she's not a woman warrior. Tell me she's not a warrior. This is a bad lady here, okay? But, you know, I mean, she had the pledge. You know, she had the pledge to be, you know, a part of the network and to be tough and strong. And the support system is not there. And so you really have to figure out how to tough it out and to work in a male-dominated culture. Particularly if you're a woman, but even if you're a person of color and you look different from most other people that are on the job, it's tough to figure out how you're going to get accepted and to get into being accepted as one of the boys, one of the girls. And that's why community-based organizations are really important to provide that support network. Not only getting access, but supporting people, at least for the first 18 months while they're sort of becoming acclimated to a whole new industry. So those are some of the challenges that we face, and a lot of it's just their personal lives. Some of it's structural, but people who are in the industry really talk about how rewarding it is once they get settled into the experience.
Well, thanks. Well, Mayor, we're hoping you can talk a little bit about, you know, we know it's not just jobs, it's quality jobs, it's careers. So how did you make that pitch to folks to businesses and to folks in Camden when you started jump-starting programs and creating programs to get folks to work and to get folks to invest in the community?
Well, certainly I want to acknowledge all of the conversation on this topic and the challenges and the barriers to break through in order to create access and opportunity for residents and particularly minorities coming from low-income communities. First, we had to start with some of the service providers to get them to start to work together. Everyone was working in their own silo, serving the same population, and not really sharing that data. And we sort of took this mindset, my administration, along with our practitioners, after we had been involved with the Department of Justice National Forum on Youth Violence Prevention. So we learned a lot about, again, talking across agencies and bringing everybody together. And so once we sort of got folks to buy into that vision and break through that resistance, then the next was dealing with the community and residents who have been promised so many false hopes and promises in the past that they didn't believe that this was a unique opportunity. It was, we've heard this before, what makes this different? How are you going to benefit me? And that's great, you're bringing all these businesses to Camden, but what does that translate for me and my family? And Mayor, I need a job. But I also knew the importance of not only giving them hope, that they can do it and encouraging them. I think women, we're more nurturers, right, in our leadership. But again, getting the right people on the bus, getting the right collaborations, whether it's working with the community college, working with our local one-stops, working with community-based organizations, and also faith-based institutions, because a lot of our residents are connected to our clergy members and our faith-based institutions. Once we sort of had a framework for a customized job training program on welding, because we had the positions in welding through a very active port, we couldn't find a welder qualified in the region. And that just absolutely blew my mind. So we began to get residents funneled into the welding program, now the pre-apprenticeship program. And so once we had that wheel turning, I approached our businesses and say, look, you have to do your part. We're happy that you're committed to Camden, that you want to call Camden home, but if you really want to make a difference in transforming this city, we need to transform the lives of people. And so we need to make sure that through our community investment agreements, which are the equivalent of a community benefit agreement, that there's a percentage of local hires, but also a percentage of local sourcing, because we want to see the small business community tie in and meet their new neighbors, if you will, and source a number of the materials that many of these jobs will need, not just on the construction side, but also on the operational side once businesses are functioning and their doors are open. So again, the way we have, sort of monitored this and wrap our arms around this work, this body of work, is through our community investment agreements, which we call CIA.
And once you do those, do you find that once you've done the first few, that companies understand them and they're more, once they see the results, it gets a little easier?
So I think there are those companies that buy in to the vision, and then there are those companies that need to be convinced. And then to Denise's comment, and so I'll be a little more direct, I guess, in working with the building trades. I mean, we literally had to use the bully pulpit at some point in time in order to create access for minority residents, for women that want to go into the construction and career in the trades. So again, I don't mind putting up a fight and advocating for residents to have access. And so we continue that dialogue, but we also continue to monitor, as my good friend Rick mentioned, the importance of evaluation, of monitoring, of using evidence-based strategies in the work that we're doing now in Camden. So we've taken a different approach.
And if I could also leverage that point, is the mayor's point, is that in our Portland project, it was a $100 million sewer water project, and it was a community benefit agreement that a coalition got passed. And the developers came in and they were sort of, oh my God, it's always resisting, what is this? I don't like it. But because we had a very proactive monitoring compliance team of community activists, and if they needed Jane the plumber next week at Thursday at 3 o'clock, they were able to source in the community Jane the plumber to show up at 3 o'clock. And so it wasn't punitive for the contractor. We became the hiring hall for the contractors to deliver the quality workers they needed to meet their targets, their hiring targets or their contracts. So we really talk about it as proactive compliance, engaging the community and understanding the needs of the employer and making sure that we are there at construction draws or these bi-weekly meetings to figure out what is the manpower staff utilization plan and how we can help the contractors to succeed. That contractor, when the project was over, was calling the mayor and saying, "This is the best thing since sliced cheese," you know, because it was a woman contractor, Prime, who was calling her subs and said, "Oh, you're not meeting your targets, and what can we do to help you?" Became very involved in seeing how it benefited the project as well as meeting the goals of the city.
And that's one of the things what you just said, Denise, about the building trades and the unions and making sure that they interact with the community-based organizations. Because in a lot of work that Swinerton has and a lot of contractors have, we're union contractors. And we cannot hire directly out of the community-based organization. We have to make sure that we have good relationships with the CBOs so they can refer an employee to us and then us in turn do a recommendation letter to the union and hopefully they'll dispatch them back to us. Because again, we can't hire directly from the CBOs. Now, there are some trades like the laborers and the carpenters that have hunting license. And they can walk on any construction project and ask if they're hiring or how can I get a job, and we can hire on the spot there. But again, with the skill trades, the MEPs, and dealing with community-based organizations and the building trades, making sure that we're all at the table. Because if that communication is not clear, the result is not going to be positive. And then there's another issue going on where there's so much work out there right now, we don't have the construction workforce to do it. Now, everybody wants these big, beautiful buildings, these scientific buildings, these green buildings, but there's not the workforce out there. And again, that gets back to schools who do not advocate construction. And because of that, they want everybody to get into college, well, everybody's not going to get into college, but then how do you get into the trades? And once you get into the trades, for minorities and women, how are you treated? I mean, there's a real cycle out there that has to be penetrated and it has to be dealt with sincerely. But again, like I said, once the contract is over with contractors, we're off to the next job. And we're taking our core workforce with us, unless that apprentice or that new employee created that relationship with that employer where they will take them to the next job. And that's where in the retention, because I know in a lot of cities that we're working in, we're asked, our retention rate. We're asked how many people who've been incarcerated, what is your program to get them the second chance out into the workforce? This is all the infrastructure that we have to have, and dealing with the infrastructure work with the federal government. When you get into Executive Order 11246 for a contractor, those 16 action steps mean something. And you have to have these policies and procedures in place to be able to document that you are an equal opportunity employer, as Denise was mentioning.
See, so that's a good point. You need infrastructure to help the infrastructure jobs, right? Infrastructure is many different things.
Right. Well, in fact, when the people have been talking about infrastructure, it says, well, make sure you have a workforce infrastructure, a part of your infrastructure investment, because the pipeline is not there. And it's going to be a big problem.
Yeah, we ran these numbers recently. I mean, there's we tend to forget that you can restart conversations in Washington, but the situation on the ground might be a little bit different.
Yes.
And last time we had this one, right, was after the Great Recession, and there was huge gaps, right, in the employment, the labor market side on construction in particular, and that gap is gone, right? So if you're talking about, looking at an infrastructure investment as kind of leading to immediate job gains, I mean, a lot of those folks are employed, right? So it's actually how do we focus on disadvantaged and at-risk populations on the ground? We're talking about a lot of public dollars here. You can really see a lot of merged benefits. How do we look at it that way and bring people into that industry? And other numbers I didn't even talk about, which is, I think you're alluding to, we've got a lot of retirements coming in this sector too, broadly. So we've got to actually backfill some of these jobs we already have. So it's a lot of jobs, there's a lot of opportunity, and we need to make sure that all peoples can kind of get into these really stable occupations once they're in there.
Yeah. That segues great into something I wanted to ask Rick about, which is you described a lot of the benefits, some great benefits at Swinerton. Talk about how you think that makes you competitive, that makes you compete when there's a lot of demand, but not necessarily a lot of workforce out there. And I'd also love to hear about, once you get folks in the door, particularly folks who might not see a lot of people that look like them in those worlds, how you retain them, women, minorities, veterans that are coming back and starting second careers. What are some strategies you do to make sure that, we know it's not just bringing people in, right? It's keeping them and developing them.
Well, that's a really broad question, but thank you.
You have 3 minutes.
We have to make sure that our infrastructure, our managers are trained and educated on the importance of diversity, on the importance of inclusion. So once we get the workforce or the employee in, how are they being treated? What opportunities are we giving them that's going to keep them interested in growing? Now, there are two sides of the equation here. One is the construction craft workforce. That's one thing. But then there's the professional side, again, our admin side, the accountants, the HR people, the IT people, the marketing people that are out there making sure that they too have a ladder or a pathway of moving forward and being able to access opportunities that come their way. And making sure that when they put in for those transfers or those promotions, or when they're going through their employee reviews, that they're talking about, how they want to grow. And if there is access to move that employee up, we definitely do it. Because when we look across the company today, it's very diverse. And there is, the opportunity, but again, it's for the managers and making sure that they are in tune, abreast of the workforce today. Because it is different than what it was 25 years ago. It's different than what it was, 10 years ago. And today with the workforce, with the, I'm not going to get in trouble here, but with the millennials, keeping that attractive to them, because I've been with Swinnerton 35 years. And when I go around do what training I do, when I say 35 years, the room falls out. I say, you worked there? Because the workforce is changing jobs like every 5 years or every couple of years. So how do you embrace that long-term? There's a career here with the 401ks, with the pensions, with the good health benefits, with the good extra incentive advancement that can happen in your development with the company. But it's paying attention, making sure your managers are prepared to deal with this diverse workforce that is coming their way.
Well, Denise, we've talked a lot about jobs, good jobs, bad jobs. How can we define quality jobs? What are quality jobs? And then how can we ensure that we're creating them?
So I think the mayor talked about it earlier. It's not quality jobs are, can you support your family, right? And that means that you have family supporting wages. We look at it as prevailing wages. Davis-Bacon. Do you have benefits? Do you have health care, retirement? When you think about the middle class, and we once had a middle class, this was built on folks that were in unions, when we had a larger union sector that had the benefits, that had the good wages, that had career advancement, that had continuing education, continue to do skill development and upskilling and ladders. They could see ladders of advancement. That's what makes for a good job, as opposed to what we see, particularly in infrastructure sector. There's a lot of, paying folks under the table and paying them for not giving them any benefits. And as we talked about, where jobs are, it's sort of a circus tent. You're in business today, you fold the tent until you find the next job. And it's a struggle to figure out how to piece this together and provide benefits that carry with you no matter what job you're on. And that's why the union sector has been so valuable, because they provide for those benefits whether you're in work today or not. And they provide the career skill development. They spend $1 billion a year on education and training of their members. $1 billion based on private money. This is not coming out of the government. Some of the best skill training, trades training you'll ever see with modern equipment. So that's what we are looking for when we talk about quality jobs. And it's a struggle for folks that are in the community, because I remember our coalition in San Francisco We had a huge battle with the labor unions, and this is what we do, okay? We have these conversations across the divide. And, you know, the union, the community activists, we wanted large numbers of jobs, right? This is going to be our first project, energy project. We wanted large number of jobs. The building trade said, well, you've got a choice. You have either job quality or job quantity. Now, if you want job quality, we will guarantee that when your workers are finished, there'll be a fewer number of them, but we'll give them more hours. We'll give them the next 3 jobs. And I think it was, you know, Rick who talked about, you know, how do you make sure that you're going to actually journey in, all right? So you go from apprenticeship to an you have to have, you know, the hours. And so they guaranteed in our community benefit agreement, the community workforce agreement, that there would be a certain number of hours, but we lost the numbers that the community wanted. But it was that trade-off. So we have to learn each other in terms of, you know, how the building trades see the world and how the community sees the world, and try and develop a way to negotiate a future for our young people and not so young people.
And that's a really good point, right? I think so much we focus on the numbers and the investment, and we don't, I guess maybe that's a little short-sighted, we don't think about the pathway, right? And that might, we talked about the marketing problem with construction jobs, you know, that it's that circus tent perception that makes people think, well, I got to make as much money as I can because there's no path forward. So maybe if we rethink that, you know, maybe Mayor Reg, you can talk about how maybe community benefit agreements have sort of helped the quantity versus quality, creating a pathway for people to move forward in jobs.
Sure. And Denise sort of hit on it, and I want to cover our community investment agreements also require the EOA project partners to invest in the training and development programs that we've been able to leverage with partners at the table, whether it's Camden County College, the Union Organization for Social Services, and others. Again, because government is restricted on the funding that we have, we know what the needs are. I know that we need to have workforce development programs for our residents, for the adults, but also looking at what do we do differently for our youth. Because as Rick mentioned, every child is not going from cradle to college to career. Some children are going to go from cradle to career and then maybe college, which quite frankly was my story coming out of high school. And we're looking at how we retool one of our public high schools, our traditional public high schools, as a career and technical education academy. And so, you know, looking at the industry forecasts with employers that are in the region and what their expectations and what they're going to be hiring for in the future is where we want to start training our young people and creating that pipeline so that they're eligible to work in the medical field or to work in, you know, urban planning. A lot of our children are underexposed, and a lot of the parents and grandparents have been underexposed. So I'll just use the example of myself. I'll put myself out there. Although I came from a 2-parent household, I was raised by my grandparents, I wanted to be a fashion designer. But had I known about urban planning, which I found out about, you know, as I got more involved in government and in community organizing and community planning with a Hope 6 when I was a councilwoman, I would have done that differently. My grandmother said, you're going to get a job in government because you're going to starve to death as a fashion designer. So that's really how I landed in government. But again, I think exposing our young people to careers that are maybe what they think out of their reach, but then also showing them the pathway or how they achieve that dream and that goal. The other benefit we have in Camden is we have a very active EDS and MEDS collaborative and task force. And just last year, and I know we've talked a lot about construction jobs, but let me go to the health sciences field. Just last year, we launched a career training program for medical assistants in collaboration with our not high schools, but our hospitals. Cooper University Hospital, Our Lady of Lourdes, and Virtua, again, exposing young people to careers in the healthcare industry. And many of them that went through that program started with a job, $30,000, which is not bad for someone 19 years old, plus health benefits and a pension. So, you know, having a quality job looks very much like, making sure you have access to health benefits, which is priceless, but also having retirement options and having those conversations with our residents. So, yeah.
Audie, we want to get you in on this. Can you, in the work that you've done, you're seeing these shortages. Are you seeing hope sort of on the pipeline? Are you seeing what are you seeing in terms of getting these jobs filled or training programs that are out there? Or, is there hope? Are we going to be able to build all these buildings, or are we going to have a great infrastructure package but no one there to work on it?
Yeah, I think the positive side here, look, there's a ton of work being done on workforce development, and really I think you're hearing it more eloquently than I could say it. What we're kind of, or at least on my side in particular, is tracking a little bit closer is that there's a growing aggregate demand here to build out the American economy from a physical perspective. We are very fortunate in this country that we have a growing population. Many of our developed economy peers don't. That means you're going to need to have more buildings. We're also seeing a tremendous amount of infrastructure getting to the end of its useful life. So what may, some jobs are going to qualify as construction, some are going to qualify just as maintenance and operations, but there's a ton of work that needs to be done out there. And that's naturally going to filter in to the labor market, right? The question is how, and I think we're hearing this on the previous question, right, is how do we make sure people know about it, right? How, and, again, I'm a little bit outside my comfort zone even saying this, but it's what some of my other colleagues at the Brookings Metro program are looking into is how do we make sure that those specific pathways, whether it's borrowing from like the European apprentice model, right, or whatever it might be, that folks understand they don't need to go to a 4-year college to get a really good sustaining job for them and their families. And that's really out there in this sector, but I don't think we're doing a good enough job pushing it out. Why I'm optimistic though is that if you've got that aggregate demand growing, folks are going to go out hiring, right? Yep. And that tends to kind of filter down nicely. But that alone isn't enough to make sure that we're protecting families and workers, to make sure that they're really connecting to the full opportunities that are available.
Oh, great.
I'd like to also raise a challenge that I'm not sure if people are tracking, but part of the good news is that we have mayors like the one on our panel who are really looking at local economic development and how to make their infrastructure investment benefit their residents. So that's the good news. It's happening across the country at the local level. But what's happening now is that there's this thing called state preemption. Are you familiar with that? So these are state preemption policies where states are saying that mayors cannot put local hire and local sourcing policies in place. Mm-hmm. So Ohio implemented that. So we've been working in Ohio to have, economic inclusion, and now in New Orleans introduced legislation. So in many of these states where their conservative governors and legislators are advancing state preemption, which is limiting our ability to advance economic inclusion. And so investments will continue to go to people that have historically been able to access these resources. So it's a new battle, a new challenge that you're going to have to, track. I don't know how your governor's doing there, but it's beginning to sweep the country.
Yeah.
As soon as we start making
Traction.
Yeah, right.
Well, connecting the dots. Well, one of the biggest questions we have, there's a lot of hope, there's a lot of excitement, but how is it going to happen? How are we going to make these investments? So, Audie, I'm giving you the big question. Tell us some of the ways that we might be able to pay for this, and can those policies, those programs be structured to get at this question of making sure we have good quality jobs, we put folks to work? So what are sort of the alternatives for paying for these bridges and filling these potholes and fixing the grid?
Yeah, this is it's like the worst question, right? It's the money, right? It's the money. I think we're at a really troubling spot right now in the country on infrastructure investment. And I want to emphasize here that I myself, my professional hat, the institution I work for, and a lot of our colleagues in town, we support more infrastructure investment, right? It is good for the country. It is the same thing as you investing in your 401k, right? Is your down payment on the future. On top of the fact that there's really demonstrated need today. The problem is that we have not shown a willingness at the national level to pay for stuff, right? And we're often trying to find new ways to we're looking for new ways to find magical pots of gold at the end of these proverbial infrastructure rainbows, right? And they're not necessarily there. We really need to step up. Now, on the good side, we've seen a lot of states and localities really step up to pay more for infrastructure on their own. And this is to say nothing of the capital markets, which I don't necessarily want to get into just yet. I think it's more of almost like a public question, the way you're posing it, which is good. States have raised their gas taxes at really impressive clips recently. We've seen ballot referenda pass at about a 3/4, so like a 70 to 75% clip across the country to pay for more local infrastructure. And some of you probably heard of most recent measures passing in Los Angeles, in Seattle, billions and billions of local control, and that's just for transportation. So there's a willingness to pay for infrastructure at the local level. I'm not sure why it hasn't fully translated here to DC yet. And to be transparent, and I don't think I'm saying anything that's crazy or politically even motivated, is that the skinny budget that came out from this administration looks to make more cuts on infrastructure. So there may be some plan coming later, but what we have to work with right now is actually cuts to infrastructure. So something isn't adding up here, right? We need more infrastructure. Everyone supports it. States and localities, through their constituencies, are finding support for it. Yet somehow our federal, both legislators, most notably, frankly, are not voting in support yet for more infrastructure investment. We're going to need to find a way to break through. And if I knew that answer, right, not only would I be a rich person, but I wouldn't be even sitting here right now. It would just be done, right? And so it's going to take a lot of action from a lot of folks. I do believe, to try to kind of connect it back here, is that the more we can connect workforce folks to the infrastructure investment side and recognize that making those investments leads to better labor market opportunities, and in particular can invest in communities, is really valuable. So this messaging needs to be hit from all sides. To be transparent, and they do a great job, so give them credit. It can't just be the engineers saying, hey, we should invest more, right? It should actually be everyone who has a stake in this 1/10 of our labor market to say, look, we can really benefit from more investment here.
Yeah, definitely. Well, now it's your turn. I want to give a shout out to the people that are listening to us on the live stream. We're going to have your questions. I know you have lots of them. I can see them in your faces. So we'll have folks walking around with microphones. And for folks that are listening via live stream, we've got a couple different ways for you to participate. You can tweet your questions using the hashtag #TalkGoodJobs. So please do that. You can also text them to this number, 202-802-6447. Let me give that to you one more time. 202-802-6447, #TalkGoodJobs. Okay, I see hands.
Hey,
Great.
how are you? If we already have an infrastructure package past this Congress, if you could name the top 1, 2, maybe 3 strategies that you'd like to see incorporated to address the workforce challenges, what would those be?
Well, for me, I would probably want to make sure that the contracting process is well defined as not low bid, but high value, right? So a low bid, high value contracts allow you to incorporate opportunities for local procurement and local hiring, and they evaluate the contract not just on how cheap is it going to be, but how well you're going to pay your workers and whether there are benefits. And that's a major structural change that I think really needs to be embedded at the local, state, and federal level, high-value contracting versus low-bid contracting.
I have a question from Twitter. Women represent 3% of construction jobs and 9% of transportation. Are there any lessons on how to be more inclusive?
So I'll take a stab at that question. I think, one of the ways that we can be more inclusive of women in the non-traditional work environment is making sure that we get that message out, right? That this opportunity is there for them. Obviously, they would have to deal with some barriers and challenges, but it's not uncommon to women to have faced barriers or challenges to untraditional settings, namely public office, right? We need to see more women in public office, but unless we're having those conversations, unless we are engaging women in ways, that support their visioning or their dreams for themselves to work in the construction industry, then again, we'll continue to see the low statistics that we're seeing today. So I think it's engagement of women in non-traditional fields.
Lots of hands. This is great.
Well, right now, it's interesting to hear the statistical numbers back and forth. And yet, my background's in architecture, and I graduated in the 70s, and I see less presence of minorities in offices and places where I go. And so we always have this conversation. We always feel like it's government. Everyone says government's interfering. That's what we're hearing now. Just get these regulations away or whatever. But monitoring, like you're saying, and the government pressure is what's making it happen. And my bigger question is to the firms and bigger places that don't see this mix that is the economic benefit for everything. What is their consciousness? So why is it always this wall that we have to be breaking against to make it happen? When in the economics of the country and the effort of the country, this is what it needs to take to lift every boat. That there's a lack of sincerity, I feel like, on the other side of the equation. It's always making people like the mayor or your group have to push back. And I feel like it's going to get harder, not easier. And I just wonder how you feel about that kind of engagement and how it's going, good or bad for you, Mayor.
Well, I can tell you that we're in uncharted territory. With the new president, President Trump. I think we're all, watching MSNBC, CNN, and to see what the latest developments are. And, just hearing the proposed budget cuts gives great concerns for me. But it also re-energizes me that we have to continue this social justice, civil rights march fight to make sure that there's inclusion in a number of arenas. And so for those of us who have made it successfully, I think we are all obligated to give back, to reach back and pull, the next, architect, the next mayor, the next developer. We have to bring our folks along. If we don't go for our folks and get them engaged and let them know what the possibilities are, and also make sure that they're on the pathway to getting their credentials so that they're ready to be hired. I think that work rests upon our shoulders. That's just me personally.
And I would just add one other thing. I also think it's become in the economic interests of major developers because the aging workforce is real. And pretty soon the pipeline is going to be filled with the demographics of the country. And that means that there has to be an affirmative outreach to bringing along folks to get into this sector if there's going to be a business, if there's going to be an architecture and engineering and construction industry. You as employers need to reach out and figure out where your workforce is coming from and begin to partner with communities and with elected officials to make that pipeline more robust.
Excuse me. Good afternoon, everyone. I have a question. So I am a director of a center in Southeast DC that has 4 CBOs located there. And one of the things that we have a struggle with is really changing the narrative for the residents that live in the area around our center and getting businesses to really kind of recognize that, even though there are labels of, low skilled, uneducated, disadvantaged, that, the residents that we work with are highly skilled, they have aptitude, and they are ready for work. And I want to just kind of pick you all's brains to just figure out what ways have you worked to kind of change that narrative as well in the work that you do.
So in response to your question, so I think, as the leader of your organization, reaching out to businesses directly, hearing from you about how your CBO can partner with a private company firm that may be in the area, what are your employment needs? And that was some of the questions that we asked employers as we were thinking about what type of customized job training programs do we need to put together for residents? Because we didn't want to train just for the sake of training, right? We want to train and make sure that there's an end goal where we can have not just the training, but the placement and the retention piece. So, I would suggest that, maybe starting to broker those conversations, finding out what the barriers are for access, if it makes sense whether or not to involve, your elected officials in having that conversation to strengthen the importance of making sure that there's local hires, local sourcing. Those would be some of the recommendations. The other piece that I think is important as we talk about prosperity and making sure that residents are working, I think we also need to embed in our programs financial literacy. So that's on budgeting. How do you prepare a resident to become a homeowner, credit counseling, and so getting them a full rounded program so that they too can achieve the American dream. So as they're climbing, they have their own goals and aspirations. Well, how do you help them to create that pathway? And I think what's important is financial literacy.
And I would add just one other thing as well. People hire people they know. And so one of the programs we had, our local LA director had an internship program where there was a $20 billion school construction initiative and for the community colleges. And the requirement, or this community benefit requirement, was to bring high school students into the job site, whether you're an architect or you're engineer construction, so that they could see what the work was like in the field. So they took academic work at the high school, they got community college credit, but they also started working with employers. And so the narrative changed because they saw, oh my God, these people are smart, they're ambitious. And so being able to provide those internships and linkages and relationships and hiring networks will be key on both sides to get to understand the industry and to understand that people are hungry for opportunity.
And to piggyback on what Denise and what the mayor just said, one of the strategies that my firm deals with is that we actively participate on advisory boards, if not on the board of directors of the CBOs. Because once we know the expertise or the population of that CBO, when we get ready to hire, our first outreach is to the CBO, who can you refer to us, because we participate on their boards. And a lot of our clients where we work, have to answer to the mayors, and the mayors have the community-based organizations, and if we're in the mix, we're giving back. So again, it's partnering with the CBOs from a private perspective.
Hi, I'm Terry Bergman with the National Association of Workforce Boards. It's clear that we already don't have enough people working in the infrastructure field. We talked about the fact that people were retiring, and perhaps if Trump, keeps up his promise, an increase in infrastructure jobs. You've talked about reaching out to people who haven't been hired in that field before. You've talked about getting parents to understand that this is a valuable direction to go. Do we have any plans about how we're going to train all these people with the skills that are needed to work in infrastructure?
I mean, I can jump in really quick. That's a great question. I'll just say this. There's no question that as part of a broader national infrastructure package, if it doesn't include workforce, if it's just dollars, whether that's through tax credits or just investment, and we pass the buck purely to states and localities, it is a massive missed opportunity. There are folks who work in every single one of the federal agencies that have infrastructure jurisdiction. Actually, I don't know about the FCC, but I would assume them too, that recognize the importance of workforce, right? So the question is, does the Hill, whenever they write out what it's going to be, do they include that as part of it? I can only speak for what I heard in terms of keeping promises, right? That there's a whole web of probably a whole separate meeting somewhere in town right now on what Buy American and Hire American means. But if that Hire American isn't for everyone and isn't to make sure all peoples can get hired, then it is just such a missed opportunity. So I'm hopeful that whoever's going to be the bill writers, and I have my own ideas on it's probably going to be more than one bill, frankly. It's too complicated to do one, but whatever it looks like, if they don't do that, then it's going to affect us in the long run, probably.
Yeah, I really don't think there's a real understanding of what it's going to take to get the job done. And when I look at the Department of Labor budget, and on the one hand, they're maintaining proposed apprenticeship programs, which is a good thing. The not so good thing is that they're cutting the youth build programs and the ones that are the feeders, out-of-school youth that provide the soft skills and, your basic, you have to pass algebra to get, my God, can you guys pass algebra? To get into these apprenticeship programs, and they're cutting the programs that are helping young people with those skills. So we're cutting the pipeline short, and it's going to be quite interesting seeing how this unfolds.
Another thing that is getting cut short is that these agencies do not have the staff to go out and do the proper monitoring if compliance is being held. I know a lot of entities, they don't have the workforce. And the construction's going on, but they don't have the people to go out there and hold the contractor's feet to the fire and say, you're out of compliance. Show me your 16 steps. Here's a show cause meeting. It's not there.
So, question
I
here.
I see so many hands, and thank you. Thank you for your enthusiasm, but we do have to wrap things up, so I wanted to be able to give the panelists a final word. I don't know who would like to start, if we want to go end to end, or... You want to...
Stay the course, folks. My one recommendation, policymakers, is high-value contracting. We can get there.
Yeah, just a quick thank you again to Aspen for having us. This is an important conversation. I think we're going to keep hearing a lot more about working in infrastructure, not just investing in it.
Yeah. And again, I want to thank the Aspen Institute and for being on this wonderful panel and the conversation, and we will continue to be innovative in our approach to transforming Camden and people's lives, and we will continue to be watchful of what's coming out of Washington, D.C., but also looking for opportunities, again, to leverage resources so that we can put people to work.
And I echo everything that was just said here. And one of the things I like to leave with, there's a gentleman who I met years ago named Art Fletcher. And he wrote the Philadelphia Plan. And there was a statement that he said when he retired. He goes, look, I'm an old man. I'm passing the torch. You young folks, you got to keep on running. Because the race is not over. So now that I'm about to retire, I'm going to pass the torch too.
Thank you all so much. Thank you to the Aspen Institute. Thank you to all.
It's a pleasure serving with you. Yeah, great serving with you. Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful. I will. I put that down.
Oh, with the